So who do you
Good
think is
morning.
to blame for the climate conditions that we find ourselves in?
Well, that depends on what numbers you look at. If you're looking at the cumulative carbon emissions since the Industrial Revolution, which is really when you go back to the beginning of this problem, then there are really three big blocks. There's USA is right up at the top there. There's the Europe, including obviously the UK, which industrialized pretty early. And then, of course, China's caught up very, very quickly. So China's right up there as well on cumulative emissions, even though it started relatively late.
Really interesting mentioning China when it comes to emissions. A figure that I have dug out is that per person, China's emissions are actually half those of the US. And that's because it's actually just a really huge country. There's a lot of people there. But their emissions are at least more than a quarter of the world's carbon emissions. So the leaders in that, it just goes to show, doesn't it, that this isn't really about individual change. This is about states meeting together and making big policy together.
Absolutely. Governments have to provide the kind of framework whereby individuals can change their lives. I mean, obviously, all emissions are ultimately the cause of the things that we consume and the businesses that produce them. So at some level, it's got to come down to the individual level, but we can't do this by ourselves. We need infrastructure. We need investment at governmental level in order to make these things possible. A very good example is what the UK has done on offshore wind and the fact that we're now getting over 50% of our electricity from carbon-free sources. And that's really significant. And it points the way to what many other countries are going to have to do.
Paul, we're talking about those green projects there, such as those wind farms. I mean, how much of that is even worth anything when you have China's emissions have tripled over the past 3 decades. They haven't even reached their peak yet. We're looking at that at about 2030. 1,000 coal plants are burning away in China, more than half of the world's capacity. It looks like we're doing our best here, but does it really count for anything? We're hosting COP26, but are we just ignoring the big elephant in the room, which is that the world's biggest polluters aren't there at the table?
Well, they will be there at the table, although not, I understand, at head of government level this time, which is a great shame. And certainly China needs to do more. But China has already made big commitments that it will be net zero, as it's called. In other words, having no further impact on climate change by 2060. That's too late. But it's much better than it was even 2 years ago when they hadn't made that sort of commitment. And they have also made a commitment that they're not going to fund any coal-fired power stations outside China, which is also a great advance on where they were, because they were building lots of such coal-fired power stations in other countries. Clearly, our Prime Minister has tried to persuade them to do more about not building more new coal-fired power stations in China. And I think we're just going to have to wait and see at COP26 whether the Chinese delegation pulls any rabbits out of the hat on that. But so far, there hasn't been any progress on that.
Professor